Good morning. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm Mary Beth Keelty, and I oversee marketing here at ForwardPMX. For those of you who might not be too familiar with us or new to us, we just wanted to take a quick minute and give you an overview. ForwardPMX is a global brand performance agency, and essentially we were we were formed through a recent merger between Forward 3D and PMX in January of this year. That merger allows us to be about 700 people across 20 offices, and we're also a part of the Stagwell Group, which is a new type of holding company that consists of approximately 20 marketing companies. And in fact, one of our sister agencies, NRG, worked with us on this study to conduct some research that we're going to cover in the study. What our ultimate goal is to help brands find the changes that fuel growth. In order to do that, we look at a number of different performance channels. And in fact, to that end, in order to find those changes, we focus heavily on understanding the trends that are relevant to marketers today. The study that we are discussing this morning is an example of that focus. With that, let's get started. Today, we have Chris Paradise, Glenn Lodge, and Sarah Pollock, who are going to cover the ever-growing and ever-evolving sneaker market. We will have about 30 minutes of content, and then we will open up for Q&A to address any specific questions you might have. A couple of quick housekeeping items. If you have a question, please use the chat feature, and time permitting, we will answer it at the end of the session, and we'll certainly follow up after. As you heard, this event is also being recorded, and we will distribute that recording in the next couple of days. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Good morning, everyone. So this project started with an idea, and having a responsibility, all of us on this call, and certainly my role, to look inside the market, understand how changes affect our clients' business, how the market forces and consumer changes affect investments that our organization chooses to make, is very much a part of where this started. Although we didn't predict the ending, and certainly didn't project the growth that we've seen and some of the nuances we will bring out in the study, it has been a fascinating project. Started off as an idea, as I mentioned, really on the back of clients and insights from the market, looking at how something as elegant and pure as a sneaker can fundamentally change industries, can fundamentally change how people perceive themselves. I want to start the beginning of the project and the beginning of the story with a young woman on a subway that ended her stop, or ended her journey at the World Trade Center. It was a Monday morning, it was a rainy Monday morning, it was not a great day to commute. And I saw her sitting on the first train with her bright pink, brand new Jordan 1 Aleli Mays retro sneakers. And I came into the office that morning to meet with this team, in fact. And it was so moved me on the train, I said to her, my gosh, those sneakers are amazing and they look fantastic on you. And of course she thanked me, and then I said, how do they make you feel? And she was a little put off by it, but I said, look, I'm doing this study with a team, don't worry. We do lots of business in this industry. And she said, it makes me feel beautiful. And I want to pause on that and really ask all of you that are on the call to open up your minds, take the 45 minutes to 60 minutes that this webinar session will take to listen inside, not just on the outer pieces of what you'll hear, but getting on the inside of these trends we discovered through the quant and the qual type of research that we did, plus all of the investigations we did across media and even down into looking at searching and how people behave online. We've really come out of this with some very important learnings that we want to share today. Imagine yourself walking into a room today. What's the first thing people look at? They might look at your eyes. They might look at your dashing outfit. For sure, they will look at your feet. And they'll make judgments, good or otherwise, about how you look, how you present yourself, based on what's on your feet. most of the people on this call, I would guess, have sneakers on because we are talking about sneakers. Today I'm wearing my Matt Williams Alex Studio Nike Freeze, which I just got, which I love. This morning, Sarah has her Via Spegas on, Mary Beth has her Eileen Fisher Eddies on, and Glenn has his Adidas blue, the Alpha Boosts. Yeah, love those on you. So, of course, we wore sneakers today in the moment, but I'm sure lots of you, most of you, I guess, would have sneakers on today. And so what's happened is that the discovery around the sneaker, as I mentioned, something so simple yet really profound, has evolved into something that has really become about identity. And it's become something that we all attach how we look, how we feel, what our emotions to. This is not like putting on a pair of Clarks. This is not like putting on a pair of sneakers that are the ones that in your closets that are your go-tos when it's raining out. You put the sneakers on because you want to feel a particular way. And so when we got into this project, we realized we needed to figure out a way to qualify and measure passion. And the word crave came up over and over and over again. People didn't use it, but we did. And crave as a way to describe levels of intensity. From, do I want them? Do I have to have them? And if you think about the differences between wanting them and I need to have those, if you go back to Sex and the City in the 90s, it was all about Manolo Blahnik and Christian Louboutin and lots of designer shoes that women really became fascinated by, not only because they wanted to wear them, but because it helped identify people and them in a new way. Similarly for sneakers. So we looked at the buyers, we looked at the fan, and then we looked at the sneakerhead. And the sneakerhead is where a lot of the focus is now, and we'll talk about collaborations and what's happening with resale later. But the sneakerhead really is driving very, very much of the activity because the brands are breaking new looks, new feels, new vibe based on what the passionate fans and those that are making them part of their lifestyle and part of their fashion choice. But the sneaker buyers too, who have a couple of pair, maybe 4 pair of sneakers of their favorite. That's what the research says, and Glenn will talk about that with Sarah a bit more, but we know that even the fans have more sneakers and the buyers have more sneakers than 2 to 4. But that is the way the research came back, and we were very astute about making sure that we were consistent with how we looked at data and information. And so what you'll hear today across 3 categories is, what are we finding out about that consumer? How is that going to impact luxury? How is that going to impact fashion and retail and how people buy, and what the collaborations mean for where trends are headed? We looked at sneakers. Travis Scott, a rapper, hip hop artist, you probably know, those of you on the phone, and if you don't, there's a whole emerging, fast-growing category of what he's done to that whole set of tunes and vibe, not unlike Kendrick Lamar has done in his approach to hip hop and rap and jazz and funk and so on. Who would have ever guessed that Travis Scott would partner with General Mills on a cereal all around Reese's? You never could have made that up. That collab wouldn't have happened if some of these sneaker collaborations hadn't created new tendencies. Similarly for the brand, what does that mean? And then what are the implications in terms of how we buy and how we sell the products now? So inside the closets of all of us, we have secrets in the corner, we have shoes under the bed, we tell our friends and significant others sometimes what's in those boxes. Sometimes we tell them, oh, I've always had those, without really telling them that you just swapped out and resold another pair to get something you wanted more. Just like a handbag, just like anything you crave, you kind of want more of them and you always want the next thing. That's the purpose of this study, is to get you inside of our findings after lots and lots and lots of conversation, hard, pure research and investigation.
Thanks, Chris. I will take over from here. Hi, everyone. This is Glenn. As was referenced earlier, ForwardPMX conducted quantitative and qualitative research in support of this study. For our talk today, the first area we wanted to focus on are consumer trends, not just the growth in sneaker sales, but also kind of perceptual trends. And there are fairly dramatic changes in perception, actually, and what they tell us about sneaker buyers, fans, and the sneaker sphere, if you will, overall. And speaking of the sneaker sphere or the sneaker reverse, we should get our bearings just in terms of basic numbers. So global athletic footwear is expected to be $100 billion by 2025. And the US has over 20% of that, with 21.2 billion in annual US athletic footwear sales. Also growing is the resale market. Globally, resale is at $6 billion, and the US has over a third of that at $2 billion. So overall sneaker sales are impressive for sure, but what is driving the growth? Consumers need shoes, but why these shoes? Why these brands? So we tried probing a bit on how folks felt about sneakers and why they felt the way they felt, which led us to this I feel good slide. Every presentation should have an I feel good slide. 87% of sneaker buyers say that buying new sneakers makes them feel good. Now, we're not talking about I needed new shoes because my feet hurt and now I got new sneakers and my feet feel good. We're talking about the act of buying sneakers, how the event itself gives them pleasure. And looking at a separate but related response, 57% of sneaker buyers say that sneakers remind me of growing up. So it's not just a shopper's high, which 87% would be a really high shopper's high actually, but for a fair number of folks, it's a nostalgia high. It's a good feeling born out of earlier good feelings. It's euphoric recall. And Sarah Pollock, who's also speaking with us here today, oversaw a lot of the qualitative one-on-one interviews. And I think a similar nostalgia theme showed up in our talks, yes?
Yes, definitely a similar sentiment echoed in the qualitative research. When we identified people to interview, our goal was to get an insider's view of what's happening from the right mix of sources, not only across the variety of sneakerheads who range in intensity and passion, but also across different generations. So in other words, sneakerheads that have seen this tremendous evolution of culture over several years, and then others who have over more recent years been witnessing sneakers really becoming much more mainstream. So in this case, on the left-hand side, we have Levi, who represents Gen Z, and Vito, who's at the tail end of the millennial generation, all talking about an emotional connection. And even deeper than that, a very specific experience they can recall about sneakers. So Levi talked about the exact moment that he was drawn into a Foot Locker as a kid and how an older friend and fellow sneakerhead at the time really influenced him and inspired him to want to share in that passion. Vito talked to us about a specific pair of Jordans and remembering every single aspect of the experience of getting his first pair. What really struck me was the level of detail they could recall, and it spoke to the incredible connection and passion they feel. For them, sneakers are not just a part of their past or their present, it's really representative of their whole identity and how they see themselves. And so as brands and marketers, we need to think about how we can really tap into that, because it's not only about bringing back iconic or classic styles, that's one piece, but it's really about the storytelling and understanding how sneakers are personally reflected in someone's life.
Thank you. So there's memory, there's deep brand connections, but nostalgia, or revivals, they tend to be faddish, relatively short-lived, and what we're seeing with sneakers is far from short-lived. So we also asked about the relevance of sneakers today to that same group of responders. And 60% of sneaker buyers believe sneakers are culturally important today. Now that's a pretty high number of folks who have a fairly serious attitude about, forgive me, it's like, it is a shoe. So it's just really interesting to consider. And that 60% is the average across everyone we spoke with. If we look at the data generationally, we see an even more pronounced story for millennial men, where 88% of millennial men sneaker buyers felt that sneakers are of cultural importance. And another notable kind of related variation was that 63% of sneaker buyers believe that sneakers reflect the world that they live in today.
In our interviews with sneakerheads and more passionate sneaker fans, there was absolutely this shared sentiment that sneakers are culturally important. During the interviews, we actually went through a series of shoes, and the Nike Cortez really stood out for obvious reason. It's the longest standing sneaker from Nike. It's really Nike's history as its first sneaker. I'm sure those of you listening know the somewhat controversial backstory to the sneaker and how it got its name, but the Cortez is really a cultural symbol in so many ways. Levi, our Gen Z interviewee, had this incredible knowledge about the shoe, particularly how it's ingrained in LA culture. In the 80s and 90s, it really wasn't as mainstream fashion like it is today. It was so deeply connected to the lifestyle and the time, and it's transcended so many social lines. Beyond the classic style it has, that's what makes it such an iconic shoe. Given all this messaging and content that speaks to the global significance of sneakers and sneaker culture is something that definitely resonates with some of these more passionate fans as well as sneaker buyers. Brands would also be smart to think about how they can deepen the connection with different cultural events and how they tie product and marketing into them.
So, aside from cultural identification, another area we probed on were attitudes around style, for sneakers specifically, but also with regard to fashion overall. And here we see 82% of sneaker fans agreed with the statement, "I am not afraid to be the first to wear something different." Now that's top box. That's absolutely agree. That is not somewhat agree. So that's really striking. And then within that, 76% of sneaker buyers also completely agreed with the same statement. So, whether you're buying 2, 3, 4, 5 plus pair of sneakers, the self-confidence and adventurousness, the adventure levels, if you will, are really high. And somewhat related with another figure we have regards social media, where 42% of sneaker buyers identified with the statement, "When I'm going out at night, I dress so that I'll look good on social media." And if you'll recall, millennial men popped for cultural significance, and they popped here again for this desire to look good on social media and to having that in mind.
When sneakers became fashionable, and I'm not talking about just when they started appearing on runways or the big brands started tapping this new generation of designers and creative directors, but when sneakers became fashion in the eyes of the everyday consumer, that's really when everything changed, and social media, of course, accelerated the shift, where all of a sudden we saw this incredible burst of passion happening online and people talking about sneakers as fashion with this entirely new level of intensity. We've seen this sort of liberation of men's fashion over recent years, and a lot of that is being driven by sneakers. Max, one of our millennial interviewees, talked about the importance of fashion of the shoe. He really thinks about shoes as a central focus of his outfit and how he likes to be bold and creative when it comes to pairing sneakers with the clothes he wears. What was really interesting to me, he said, "I'll forgo the comfort if the design is crazy awesome," which is totally a Max thing to say. Sneakers were traditionally all about comfort, and while it's still definitely an important element, you see some consumers that actually really only care about how fashionable the sneaker is instead of how comfortable it is to wear. This is, again, a totally different perception of sneakers than we would have previously known.
Thanks, Sarah. So we just looked at how sneaker buyers don't fear being the first to try something new. They aren't afraid to look different. So it follows that the majority also want to look different. They want to stand out. They want to be original. And this is particularly true of Gen Z, who we actually haven't talked about much up until now. 63% of male Gen Z buyers say they don't like wearing the same sneakers that a lot of other people are wearing. And an even higher number, 69% of female Gen Z responders felt the same way. Now, this attitude about sneaker originality and uniqueness extends out to beliefs about fashion overall, where 71% of sneaker buyers agreed with the statement they like to have a unique style. And notably, the key subset there was female Gen X buyers had a whopping 90% had this either desire or belief that they already have a unique style.
Yeah, and again, across the board, our interviewees expressed to an extent that originality is important, especially when it comes to the perceived value of the shoe. Levi, we had him drawing very passionately on the fact that when all the other kids might be wearing one particularly hot pair of sneakers, in his eyes, it's actually less coveted and less valuable. Hector also echoed that sentiment. In fact, he said he won't actually wear a certain pair of shoes if everybody else is seen wearing them. This is really another key example of consumers driving brands, because originality and personal style and expression are so important to these communities. It's really pushing brands to be bolder with their collaborations, who they bring on to help design, and what influencers they're partnering with. The ability to customize is something that's really actually very appealing to the everyday consumer. And so both personalization and customization are definitely trends that we'll likely see continue.
Hey, Sarah and Glenn, would you say that sneakers are drawing out these kinds of percentages? I mean, it's unusual for us to see high 60s, 70s, and higher in the statistics. Is it really the sneaker that's causing people to reach out and make that statement so boldly, in your opinion?
You know, I think it's inspiring them, but I think it's really about how people see themselves differently today. I think that people just in general are more bold, and I think social media has really driven this to express their identity online and be much more comfortable about that. I think sneakers have definitely helped this, and I think it's inspiring, and people are aspiring to sort of express themselves differently online.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. I mean, sneakers are certainly these multiple pairs per year buyers that reflects, a desire to really stand out and is plugged into style. But I also think it also can, I think, in certain cases, be a genesis. So especially with some of the collaborations between designers and traditional sneaker manufacturers.
Thanks. Great.
Yeah. Finally, here at the bottom of this page is a finding that, frankly, we weren't even looking for in our initial work, but it kind of popped in our one-on-ones, and so we fed it through all the field work. And that is the number of pairs of sneakers or responder purchases in a given year correlates roughly to how that person wants you to look at them. So on the left, you'll see that sneaker buyers, and those are folks who bought, say, 2 to 4 pair of sneakers. The majority, not all by a stretch, but the majority of them said that they'd rather you notice their clothes first before you notice their shoes. But as we move to the right, the more pair of sneakers that someone buys, the more likely it is that they would rather you look at their shoes first before you looked at the rest of their getup, if you will. So, we've been talking about, these past few slides have been about the sneaker market, kind of stuff, culture, style, self-image, which we're really interested in, but they're on the softer side. There is one straightforward demographic change, which is also helping to fuel sneaker growth, and that is women.
Yes, the rate of growth in the women's sneaker market is actually outpacing that of men's by 5 times. This is a stat that was actually from 2017. And if you look at what was happening at the time, it makes a lot of sense. In 2017, we really started to see a shift and an emphasis on women by sneaker brands in ways that we really hadn't seen before. In the collaborations that were happening, the expanded size and design options, and the way that big brands started to incorporate women into their campaigns. And the seeds were really starting to be planted before 2017. If you recall, in 2014, Puma brought Rihanna on as a creative director. Of course, flash forward to today, and she now has a label with LVMH. Brands have really started to incorporate women into key roles to lead the direction of the women's business. But it did really take some time for them to wake up to the opportunity, and I think they really still are at this point. So if we look at some of these key influencers in the women's market, there are obviously already incredibly passionate, well-established communities led by women that love sneakers. This is just a small collection of them. They're just as connected, just as knowledgeable and influential, and their audiences are really just as hungry for the options and styles that weren't really ever available to them before. To call out a couple of key women. So Alayli May, who's become hugely influential, and Chris was talking about a pair of her Air Jordan 1s in the beginning. She was the second woman to collaborate with the Jordan brand on the Alayli May by Jordan 1, and later the Jordan 6, which is a more universal unisex shoe. And as an ambassador for Nike, she definitely caters to a younger audience, but she's also inspiring and empowering women that share this passion, and it's what really makes her pop with this audience. Anna Bendiones, who's also been tapped by Nike, she also writes for Complex, has talked about not only making more of the hottest styles available in all sizes, but also how brands can be taking design input from female voices to create women's exclusive lines that aren't just feminine colorways or smaller in size, but they're actually created for and by women. The numbers are small now, but the growth potential is huge. And I think brands are definitely investing a lot of time and resources to make sure they're getting this right, given the tremendous opportunity that exists. And I'm personally very excited to see how this continues.
Thanks, Sarah. So as part of this effort, we asked questions about how consumers feel about sneakers overall, but we also asked them about specific brands because we wanted to gauge brand strength and perception. So here is a quadrant that looks at a brand's power that's along the vertical axis, and it's made up of things like intent to purchase and perceived momentum, and that's versus popularity on the horizontal, which is built from awareness and positive perception. Composite scores for each brand are plotted against each other, so you have the 4 quadrants demonstrating the strengths and weaknesses for both measures. And so actually what you're going to see here is in the upper right quadrant, the leading quadrant as we've called it, is Adidas and Nike. It's like among classic sneaker brands, these brands still dominate both in awareness and intent to purchase. But it's not just about the upper right or kind of the winners box, if you will. We're also very interested in the upper left, which is the rising. And here you'll see Under Armour and also Vans, which is just starting to creep up into the upper left. And these are notable because although their overall popularity is lower, their power is relatively high, meaning that although fewer survey responders claimed a strong awareness of the brands, those that were familiar had a much stronger intent to purchase the brand. So sort of like to know them is to love them in a way. Now, we use the quadrant to kind of get a feel for the major brands that are out there, but we are also interested in up-and-comers. And across the broader consumer landscape, we've seen a lot of disruptors, if you will, and a growing number of categories that once seemed relatively set and fairly predictable. So if you think about mattresses, and then there's Casper, or shaving, and there's Harry's, or dental hygiene, and there's Quip. And the sneaker market does have a growing number of entrants or re-entrants potentially impacting sort of the sneaker universe. And we have a few listed here. Fila's at the top. It's more of a re-entry, but there's some really jaw-dropping growth. And the growth on that side is based on Google search volume, by the way. So we take current search volume and compared it to a year ago. And so Fila overall has 170% growth. They kind of aptly named Fila Disruptor, up 724%. And then the recent collab announcement, Fila and Fendi at 4,000. But to be honest, so Fila is there re-entering strong. Allbirds is more of a classic disruptor brand, though, if you will. It is like eco-friendly. I'm trying to remember, it's wool and trees and sugar, or how they describe the things that go into the shoe. They are moderately priced and they are direct to consumer. So one other exercise that's part of the study that I hope everyone downloads is it brand perception? So here we asked survey takers, we gave them a list of attributes and a list of brands, and for every brand they felt they were aware of, they went through the same attributes and sort of rated them, like things like trendy, artistic, innovative. We then created this perceptual map, and this shows the relative ranking of how highly associated a brand is to a given attribute compared to how highly another brand is related to that attribute. And so what you'll see here in the blue circle is the sportier brands, Nike, Adidas, Puma, Under Armour, are all perceived as similar things: valuable, high quality, influential, innovative. These are all great things to be. I would note that they're not all that well distinguished, those, in terms of the attributes that people associate with the brand. Kind of more interesting in a way is who is outside of that circle. And on the far right, you'll see Converse and Vans. These brands are perceived as more unique and youthful, but they live outside of that core of performance attributes, and they're especially far away from an attribute like overpriced. So Vans, last thing I'll note on this chart is Vans is the most closely aligned with the term artistic. And so that prompted us to take a closer look at Vans. So of all the major brands that we looked at, including Nike, Adidas, Puma, Vans has grown the most in terms of search interest over 2016, 17, 18. That is year after year after year, they have continued to grow. And as previously mentioned, you know, attributes folks associate with Vans are like unique, trendy, and artistic. But while their awareness is low, among the survey takers that we included here, they're very much popping with females. 71% of Gen Z female sneaker buyers reported Vans as they perceive them as being on the way up. And if you don't believe the survey stats, you can always just go to social media, where we found plenty of examples of people vouching for Vans. And this is one of our favorites. I've come to realize that the appropriate footwear for any occasion are Vans. No more heels. So
Come on, Glenn, say it.
Eva, I guess, right? There we go. So I've been talking about individual brands, but there is a very significant trend, a dominant trend going on, which isn't just about one brand, but it involves multiple brands. I think Chris is going to talk about collabs.
Where would we be without collaborations? Where would sneakers be? Where would cereal be without a collaboration with Travis Scott? It is a time where sneakers, for all that they are that we've been talking about, are influencing streetwear, of course, fashion, art, design, architecture. It's what Sarah was saying earlier, that conversations that wouldn't have happened before, with the candor and the honesty that is happening now, that sneakers are creating. And that's the nuance we would suggest the brands on the call and anybody involved with marketing and brand development or any kind of business investment to take note of, because it's not just the trends that we've discovered, but it's what's inside of those trends and what it's creating. And the culture movement is not insignificant. We've had lots of questions about whether streetwear is dead and whether the sneaker phenomena is just going to fade out. No way, obviously, based on the numbers and Sarah's comments about the women's markets and the research that we've done there. The numbers are tiny relative to the population size. Alone, look at what has happened to the world's view of women's soccer over the last month. What does that create for opportunities? You can be sure someone's going to have a sneaker, but it's not just about the sneaker. Virgil Abloh just finished his first, I believe, of 4 stints in Vegas as a DJ. And why does he DJ? Not just because he's a musician that started with Kanye. He DJs because he believes he has to be living inside of his customer, as it were, or inside the culture, to be able to understand it so that he can design buildings, clothing, oh yeah, sneakers, work for Louis Vuitton, work for private enterprises for art installations and private buyers who might use his insights, not unlike PHARRELL, who you would know, many of you, for being a musician. He became the most famous with the song Happy. And if you read all about that, by the way, a little side message, if you've never watched every version of the song Happy, I would encourage you to do it. There are 24 of them because he recorded one every hour on the streets in LA. It's a fantastic view of a song from different points of view of different people. Very, very moving. But like Virgil Abloh, PHARRELL is also a designer and a futurist. And he's very, as he says, he's very conscious about what's missing and where he would go from here and where he would go next. There's a reason why his sneakers, now this is off the charts, but his sneakers are $5,000, $8,000, $7,000, $10,000. First of all, they're very, very limited in quantity, but similarly, Kanye, when he was with Nike, those are really the most coveted, although his sneakers continue to be very popular. So I'm mentioning a few around the collaborations because they are somewhat iconic, but there are lots and lots of collaborations now happening. Nigel Sylvester, who's a streetwear, an urban boarder, skater, and then lots of other ones you may or may not know. And of course, we're seeing that in the women's market. Would it be that surprising to see a women's soccer star have a pair of sneakers? I don't think so. How the buying behavior is changing is being very much influenced, of course, by people. but also what technology exists. And so bots and the use of AI and machine learning to be able to intercept, disrupt, or get in the front of the line basically without having to stand there for the next drop is very much happening. And the brands and the manufacturers are working around that so that everybody has these same choices and not just having technology make that choice for them. We mentioned earlier about personalization and customization. It's happening in automobiles. It certainly happens in your home. It happens with your clothes. Why would it not happen with a pair of sneakers? And so we looked at the shoe surgeon and what he's doing, because he has made the most ground in terms of making consumers aware of what's possible, and now has a whole series of workshops where you can go to learn how to do it and learn how to deconstruct a sneaker and build one for yourself. And he sells thousands of pairs of these sneakers, and then essentially turns these people who have attended his workshops into designers themselves. And so the trend is only, frankly, just beginning. Social is, of course, hugely important.
Yeah, and if we're talking about social, we really can't talk about it without talking about influencers in the same sentence. Influencers are, of course, much more a focus for brands. I think there was a stat this year, 72% of brands had influencer marketing built into their budgets. We also really can't look at the trend of influencers without first looking at how the notion of influence has really evolved. It's not just fame and celebrity anymore. It's also not about the number of followers someone has. We have this new world of micro influencers, where influence is actually all about bringing someone into your lifestyle and inspiring them to want to make a piece of that lifestyle a little bit of their own. And I think we hear a lot of phrases like genuine, authentic, but the influencers that are successful by this sort of new definition have a natural ability to harness passion. It's more so about the vision of that influencer and how a brand is naturally ingrained in that vision. That's really what makes it authentic. And this really couldn't be more critical in sneaker communities. These people are so smart and so passionate, especially with so much noise around celebrity. Designers and celebrities absolutely still have influence, but if you look at where they're getting some of it from, especially in streetwear, it's really coming from the outside now. These micro influencers are creating new trends literally every day, and it's this group that brands, I think, really should be paying attention to and really bringing them on in terms of having a voice in the product and marketing.
It's great. So such good insight, and this is just beginning, of course. We're not mentioning what's happening in resale, because every time we tried to nail it down and put it on a couple of slides, everything changed. And so if we want to know where the trends are going, we can literally read every day and who's investing in whom. And it's just cliche and almost passé to talk about what happened a week ago, because there's something literally happening today. And so you see an organization like StockX that started off with sneakers, now using that platform to sell watches and sell clothing and sell handbags. Certainly art will come up, like the Real has done the same thing. So not surprising, it's impacting luxury. Stadium Goods now being combined with Farfetch, and what's happening there, that's bringing the Farfetch platform to Stadium Goods, who's predominantly a sneaker reseller, and they have retail, of course, but that's opening up new doors. And not unlike what we said earlier with collabs, and how brands that were formerly known as luxury, very exclusive, and live within the walls of the fashion house, are now reaching outside beyond just the obvious collaborators, but introducing the content producers and the influencers that Sarah mentioned into their world. And so you see High Society, which really started as a sneaker influencer and a content expert in the sneaker marketplace, now getting involved with retail transactions. Not surprising that Hypebeast, similarly in Chicago, had a setup at SneakerCon and ComplexCon and so on, to be able to connect people with the ability to buy, and now they're sellers. We're right on the edge of them being designers too, and it's not any different than a fabulous Vogue editor suddenly moving into a fashion position and suddenly becoming a designer himself or herself. So we're seeing very much the same thing in luxury. This is a bit of a tip-off. We do a luxury study of significance that comes out of Glenn's team, our research team. That's very considerable and very well known. And you can bet that we're going to be talking about sneakers as it relates to luxury and where that's going. So I'll stop there, except to say more to come in that regard. So where is all this heading? We've covered lots of different looks and views to try to take this conversation, and all of you that are on the line, and thank you so much, but take you inside our heads, inside our closets, to be honest. We've learned a lot through this process as an organization, and the ability to be able to bring perspective to our clients, but also to be able to inform the marketplace and what this really means. The wearer is leading that conversation. These new influencers we're talking about are setting the tone. When I first started working on this project, I wrote down the wearer is leading the conversation and the rage, not the maker. They are the new influencers. That's really what's happened, that the brands have been completely flipped upside down. I'm not sure the brand owns their brand anymore. I think people do, and that's for another day and a longer conversation. But we have disruption happening everywhere, and the consumer, the human being, the people who are really starting with their feet and starting with a sneaker have opened up new worlds in ways that we couldn't have anticipated. Glenn has a smoking new pair of Adidas on today, all because this study kicked off a whole new opportunity to refresh his closet, and all of us have a new appreciation, I suppose, for sneakers in ways that we didn't imagine. Others of us have shoe and sneaker issues and problems, and all those boxes under our beds, maybe they have more sneakers than they used to have. So thanks everybody for joining. This was a blast to do. I wish you were all in the room, that we could get all your questions face to face, because it is such a powerful moment in time, and it seems like such a simple thing, but great to have you here and to participate. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks so much, everyone. That was wonderful. We do have time for a couple of questions. Again, you can ask a question through the chat feature, and if you don't get to submit it, we'll certainly follow up with an answer. We, of course, have gotten just a couple, and starting off with the obligatory question of whether or not we will be making the study available. Of course we will. We will be following up with how to download the study after the event, and we will also share the recorded webinar. We did get one question specifically about the survey that we did with NRG. Glenn, can you talk a little bit about how many people were in the study?
Sure. We had 5 for the quant study, the online survey. We had 500 survey responders, and we shaped that actually after some preliminary work. We only took those who had purchased 2+ pair of sneakers in the past year. And for the qualitative interviews, we did about a dozen one-on-one interviews for that. And I actually should mention that if someone wants to understand the methodology better, they should feel free to message us here, and we'll gladly follow up.
Absolutely. So with that, we don't have any other questions in queue, but again, we will take any questions afterwards. You can certainly send your contact an email or reply back to one of the messages that we've sent to you. With that, we hope you enjoyed the event, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.